adult version of taking your bra off for the day. When you got home and took off your church clothes. But no, I
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Got back in your play clothes. Good stuff right there. The cups of wisdom as we did in our past, right? Was it balls? It was balls or cock. There was an episode where it was like
balls.
Said like five. Okay, but it's balls.
Herbie's old fucking balls.
Old fucking balls.
That young woman.
There's your intro. Roll that footage. Yeah, we are not the quiet, demure ones he raised us to be.
Welcome to the Apostate Sisters interview series, where we get to know fellow survivors of the Worldwide Church of God. Each episode, we sit down with former cult members to uncover their unique stories of struggle, resilience, and liberation. Through these conversations, we aim to shed light on the complexities of cult dynamics, the process of deconstruction, and the profound journey towards self-discovery and healing. Join us as we explore some deeply moving personal stories, offering insights and inspiration to anyone on a path to reclaiming their own voice and freedom.
I was always taught that if anything crept in that was not what they wanted, that was the devil. Don't even let it, you let him seep in for a minute, correct yourself, like you're slipping, and that was that. I think that was something that stuck with me for a long time too, was that, oh no, you're thinking for yourself. What's going to happen? This could be catastrophe.
And I love, Jay, that we really don't know anything about you. And yet Patty and I have realized every survivor of the Worldwide Church of God, we felt connected to in some way. It's kind of like, I also served in the military, and I feel like a strong connection to anyone else who has served in the military, regardless of what war they were in, which branch they were in. It kind of feels like our own little community too, like we understand each other.
The thing that I truly, even after I started healing and wasn't really separating the psychological stuff and I was really in my new self, I still find that I miss the community, right? Like the camaraderie, the Feast of the Tabernacles and the youth programs. And I think that we were really all mostly good people that thought we were doing a good thing that was led by someone who was very secretly behind the curtain, not a good person. Having this platform that you guys are creating and being able to talk with others is kind of bringing that community back in some way, which I think is really beautiful, because it's something that was like really a void, I think, for the people who, no matter what side of the fence they left on or how they felt when they left, I think it was because we were isolated, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I remember because of the sundown rule, I couldn't go to most friends' birthday sleepovers because I had to be up Saturday and I was supposed to be in the house for Friday, but they had kind of the same rule on Saturday nights for Sunday morning service. So I just never got to go unless it were, other little girls that were in the church that could come sleep over and we would go to church together and our parents knew each other. We were kind of isolated. So when that went away, it was like how you would have really imagined excommunication or exile, but it was like everybody was exiled at the same time. So I think that was just, I think that was a huge loss to all of us, no matter what side of the fence you were on, because it was just like, who do you talk to? Who do you trust? Who do you, who can we be really honest with right now? And there wasn't a lot of that. I know for my parents and in my home, it was just kind of we're going to go away and figure this out. And we just never talked about it. We never went back. We never figured it out. It was just kind of over,
Oh, wow.
So I think that community was probably the largest thing. And I don't think that I'm alone in that. I would think that a lot of people would agree that it was just kind of like your whole life. Yes. It was your whole life.
Now, did you move into any other religious systems coming out of Worldwide when it kind of collapsed? And maybe we're jumping ahead, but I guess I'm curious about the piece that happened, like what brought Jay to now.
Both of my biological parents were together. They were married. Divorce was never on the horizon. They were an owner of a generational company that had been passed down to them. I had always thought I was a third generation. I recently found out that I was a fourth generation. So my family was deeply, deeply involved, and they pretty much had, submerged their entire life in that. And I understand now kind of a silent segregation or maybe even a little bit of racism in my home that I didn't understand. Not because it was flat out said, but because it was just, you talk to these people, these are your people, stay with them. And there wasn't a lot of variation in color within those groups. So
Mhm.
I was always also told that it was wrong to have a romantic relationship with someone in any other race. And that, we were supposed to
Oh.
stay separate and, love them, but at a distance and don't get in bed with one, and go ahead.
But did they come out and just blatantly say that? Because for us, I mean, it was implied, but they never actually specifically said.
I don't think that it
So
was ever said like in a sermon.
yeah.
Um, but the elders in my life were very much like, you do understand that that would be wrong, right? It
Mm.
was very gentle, and like I said, it was very, I didn't even understand that it was hate until afterwards.
Well, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was just
Wow.
it was so gentle. And so, within, I would say, a 9 to 12 month period, we left the church. That night, by the way, my parents went to Ponderosa and ordered steak and lobster tail. And I held my breath as they were taking the first bite because, and I'm not even exaggerating, I assumed, because we didn't have this conversation, that, there was this new covenant with God and that our rules were archaic and they were changing and we were adopting anything new. It was almost this day of Armageddon. I'll never forget it. My mom kind of laughs because I tell her, I remember it was pouring down rain when the announcement came. Were you guys there?
Now, are you talking like the Christmas Eve
Christmas Eve
94?
94. Yeah.
Okay, we were, but for some reason that night does not like register to me as like whomp at all. And I'm hearing from other people that it
It's
had that
insane.
effect. So this is so interesting.
I
But it,
remember because we
yeah.
never really paid attention. At this age, I was little. I was still at my mom's feet, coloring. And I remember kind of hearing in and out of the sermons every once in a while, but I was never fully, absorbing. So I don't really remember what he said or at what point the reaction happened, but I will never forget this. And we were in one of the really large churches. I'd have to ask my mom which one, but because we traveled a lot, having family in both Missouri and Arkansas in churches, we would go to their church and back to our home church. And so I remember hearing this just giant audible gasp that was like, so I looked up and I remember seeing some people like clutching their chests and some people grabbing their babies. And I was like, oh, what's happening? I think
Yeah.
I was 7, 8. So I was just like, what this feels bad. The whole energy changed. And I remember seeing my mom look at my dad and she's like, I now know that she's like, get the car. So we get to the door and it's pouring down rain and it's December. So I've got my white tights on. And I remember looking down and seeing the mud splash up on my white tights and being like, this is not okay. Like my mom always carries me over the mud. Like, what is happening right now? And it just,
Wow.
every little detail, it's like a very trauma response story, that those
Oh,
Yeah.
minute
shit.
things really stuck. So I remember looking up and I was short enough that my hand was above my head holding her hand. In my memory, there were like balls of fire falling from the sky. Like that's how afraid I was. And it took me years of therapy to realize that that wasn't actually happening. It was rain, but I don't know if it was my childhood imagination or it was Armageddon. It was happening in front of me. That was my reality in that moment. So my
Yeah.
dad got there and we got in
Wow.
the car and we never talked about it. We never talked about it. So of course, not hearing that sermon, I had no idea what happened. I had no idea.
You were a
So
child. Yeah. How could you possibly know the ramifications? You just knew that something was wrong. See, Patty and I were already, you were off to college at the time of the 94
No,
Christmas
I
Eve,
was
right?
14. I was
Oh, you were
14.
14.
So
Oh,
by
okay.
all accounts, I should have understood what was happening, but I think I was just old enough that I didn't give a
well, and yeah, I think that's like kind of on that cusp of having your own opinion and finding your own things. So having being
indeed.
raised in it for that long, I doubt that it was like this violent separation of thought. It was
Yeah.
probably just like, I'll do what I'm told when I'm told to do it. Because your parents were probably still telling you everything, that you were supposed to do.
Well, and
Yeah.
that I was old enough that I was like, I don't want to listen to this crap. I'm going to go do what I want to do. Like I was very in my
Mhm.
rebellious phase by then, so that
Yeah.
makes sense to me why I didn't have that moment with that
Yeah.
sermon.
Yeah.
But for you, you said 4 years old or
No, I think
so?
I was either 7 or 8.
Did
I
your
mean,
parents
that's
leave the church at that point, or did they stay?
Never set foot back in a church after that.
and
Did
they
they
Never.
go
went
to an
straight to the
option?
Ponderosa for lobster?
Yes. Okay, so that's the rest of the story. We have to
What?
rein
Yeah,
in
that
my
doesn't make
ADHD
sense.
here. Um, so they ordered steak and lobster, and my brother ordered popcorn shrimp, and they were like, "Do you want to try it?" And I'm like, "You'll go to hell. Like, you've all lost your mind. I
Yeah.
need to call someone. Like, this is insane. And I remember holding my breath and watching the first bite, thinking they were just gonna spontaneously combust. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I was
Right.
just like, what the hell is happening? I was completely unhinged on the inside. And I
Mhm.
didn't even realize it until now. But it was
Well,
like
they'd
kind of a violent.
indoctrinated you, and
Yes.
then somehow they walked away from their own indoctrination in a split second?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's another layer that I think I had to dig up. I'm curious to know if any other children realize this later, how much of a hypocrisy your parents were actually living in the entire time.
Mhm.
Oh, dang. All right. All
Yeah.
right.
I realized that I didn't have a problem with lying as long as no one knew I was lying.
Yes. And you got good at it, didn't you?
Damn good at it.
Definitely
Damn good
Oh,
did.
at it.
yeah.
Because I missed out as a kid, and that
Yeah.
pissed me off. You know what I mean? I remember my parents being busy business owners. They would forget that I had a class party that day or a Christmas sing along kind of thing. And I would have to sit it out and watch the other kids. Or I remember one time my teacher felt bad for me and she rolled up a brown bag of the Halloween candy, but she drew a jack-o'-lantern on the outside and stuffed it in my backpack. Right when the party started, my mom got there and I was all bummed and I got home and was like, yes. But I showed
Aw.
it to her and
Oh,
she made
no.
me dump it out
Mm.
because it was evil candy. I remember they used to say that we couldn't even have an alternative event because it was still acknowledging the day.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so I couldn't even have the
Wow.
candy. My mom and I argue now because we have very different political views, and that's something else I've had to come to terms with. That was very against our religion, was that God was in control and he was going to put in office who he wanted to put in office, and it didn't really matter what we thought, just to pray for the best outcome and roll with the punches. So I honestly didn't pay that much attention in civics, and I wish that I had a lot more knowledge of the government and its inner workings and how our country works. And I, as an
Yeah.
adult, felt ignorant trying to have adult conversations and was like,
You know what, though? I will say that is as much on the public school system as it is on parents that we
100%.
had.
Like the church control is the way that you win for them. You know what I mean?
Oh, hell
I
yes.
mean,
Yay,
as
my
long as
gosh.
we're not researching, we're not getting any smarter. And as long as we're arguing with each other, we're not looking at what they're doing.
Hey, how did
I'm
you
down.
find our channel? Because for so many years, Patty and I did not really delve into the Worldwide Church of God. In fact, not long after we were both out of high school, I mean, we both got into evangelicalism for a while, horrible few years. Then we got out of that, and then we discovered, well, we were both atheists. We just don't believe in a God at all. So, did you go looking for like the code words? Herbert W. Armstrong, Worldwide Church of God. Were you curious to know more about it? Like at a certain point in your life, you're like, okay, I got to go back to this, or did you just
Yes.
happen upon us by chance?
My parents, it was like a band-aid being ripped off, right? It was very violent, it was very instant. Within a year they had to file bankruptcy, had lost their business. Obviously it had nothing to do with triple tithing, but that's for another
Of course
conversation.
not.
um, they divorced, and then my mom instantly started dating a black guy. And
Oh,
yeah, so I was like, oh shit, she ate
no.
food, the divorce, the new race, like we're done for, right? Like my mom has completely lost her mind. She's leading us straight into the gates of hell. So I caught her and him smoking pot one night. And
Holy moly.
I was
Okay.
almost 10, and I remember it's hilarious now, like knowing who I am, but I remember standing at the front door, yelling into the front lawn, I hate you and you're going to hell. And I slammed the door.
Oh,
And I just remember feeling
yeah.
like I can't comprehend why she's doing these things, because she didn't tell me that, most of these things weren't wrong anymore. So here I am just thinking a demon's got a hold of my mom. And my poor stepdad, he had a hell of a time getting in my heart, but he is my dad. He's
Oh.
definitely my dad. But so after that, I think I held on to that for a lot longer than I'm willing to admit, maybe even into my young adulthood. Not necessarily the doctrine itself, but most of the beliefs, I would say. And then I think I was about 16, we moved across the street from, it was Episcopalian, I believe. Um,
Mhm.
but it was a predominantly black church with a lot of soul. And I heard the music one day from my front porch and I was like, I like that. And I walked over and they were super welcoming and I was so at home and I was like, I'm at peace. I knew God was out there and I knew that this is where I belonged. I just strayed for a little while. And then there was an attempted sexual assault from on me from the pastor and I was 16.
Oh,
Wow.
So
okay.
thankfully he didn't succeed, but I lived across the street. So now I was in this weird situation of just leaving quietly because I'm really confused now. Like this is a whole nother level of where is God, you know?
No
Um,
kidding.
so I think I went through that phase where I tried out a few here and there, but it was very after that first experience, it was very short-lived. And then I got with my kid's dad who was raised devout Catholic. And I agreed to convert because I'm like, what the hell? I don't have any of my own beliefs at this point. The cathedral's gorgeous. Like
Mhm.
they won't let me get married there if I don't take the classes and I don't convert. Like it really didn't feel like a lot to me. I didn't put a lot of weight to it. But then thankfully I got out of that. It was a lot of work. I was pregnant. It was a lot. So unfortunately that relationship turned extremely abusive. And during that time, I was, of course, searching again, like, where is God? Where is peace? Where is healing? I was living in North San Diego County and I just I think I was Googling. I found this blog called Escaping Armstrongism. So they have everything from sermons to old plain truth articles, along
Yeah.
with like an open forum for ex-members, and it's a very honest place. And that was the first place that I started reading some of the things that we had been told to ignore for a long time, a lot of the
Yeah.
allegations and things. But
True.
that really kind of like threw me into this place where I was hungry for all of this information because it
Mhm.
explained why I had struggled. You know what I mean? It was an answer to a
Yeah.
question I had been searching for
Mhm.
decades. So I think that was the first time that I went through I need this information, and that would have been probably about 10 years ago. And then I went to that church, which was I wouldn't even like to call it a church. It was more like a spiritual educational center. And
Yeah.
the pastor pulled me aside one day, and she was just like, "There's something going on, and I just need you to know that I'm here." And I just started sobbing, and I was
Oh,
just she's like, "Is it personal? Is it religious? Is it?" I was like, "Both." And
yeah.
I said Armstrong's name and she just reached out to me. She was like, "Oh, honey, come here." And that was
Oh,
the first time I was 1,800 miles from home and this woman knew my trauma. And I was just like, wait, do people know? Like, is this a
yeah.
thing that people
Some do.
understand? Yeah. And I was beginning to understand that there was this wide belief that I had been in a cult.
Mhm.
I was just kind of like, holy shit, this was more than some bad understanding or bad translation of the Bible. I was raised in a cult. And that
Mhm.
that word was really hard to say. And she was
Yeah.
got really close to me, and allowed me to explore a lot of religions. I think I lie somewhere between humanism and Buddhism. Uh,
Ooh, okay. Yeah.
Humanism, I think, I lean more that way because I have just found that I do believe that there is some type of fate and karma and energy transfer.
Mhm.
I don't settle with the fact that there's this unidentified centripetal force controlling it all. I don't know that there isn't. I'm not completely, I don't have proof that there isn't, but I have absolutely no proof that there is.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do have proof of kindness and a giving heart and loving people and being loved. And for me, that is my religion. And
Yeah.
it's humanism. You know what I mean? We're
I
humans, and
do.
none of the other shit matters at the end of the day.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that is
All
where
of that.
I
That
know
deserves a heart.
I
Yeah.
talk
Come
to a
on,
lot of
go.
people. Oh
Yay.
wait, oh
This
thanks.
is what I'm talking about with former survivors of the Worldwide Church of God. For so long, I had no idea either that we were so, what's the word I'm looking for? Expanded, so broad. There's so many of us. And
Yeah.
Patty had no idea this concept of Armstrongism is still alive and well in the world in the form of hundreds of different offshoots that still teach the same ideologies as Herbert
Yeah.
W. Armstrong. They're still out there, and our parents are still enslaved in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, why did I think that? Why did I think when it dissolved for us that like, oh, okay, I guess it just fizzled and went away in the world? Holy crap, it was like
yeah,
dandelion.
it didn't even fizzle in me. So how would it have fizzled out in an entire, you know what I
Right.
mean? It's how deeply it was stuck in our sides. Of
Mhm.
course they didn't just of course they didn't. My mom left, and never went back. And she still to this day struggles. I think the reason she's never set foot in another house of God is because she still is. What if, right? What if we were the chosen ones? Like, what if I just never say anything else and my ticket to Petra is still good? You know?
Petra!
Oh,
And I
wow.
think
There.
there's that inner fear of like, well, what if, you know what I mean? How blessed would I have been to have been a part of that? And I'm not going to screw that up by undoing it all. And it's still,
Still, the control is there.
yeah, she still has a lot of understanding to do. And it's a
Fear is the
process.
ultimate control tactic. Yeah, it's a process.
Absolutely.
It can take you. There are people that reach out to us too, Jay, that they want to tell their story, but they are still not ready to yet.
I
And that
understand
we
that.
completely understand.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Patty and I stopped giving fucks already. Like we can't censor ourselves, nothing. Because again, who does that help? It doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
So all we
Like
can
I
do
said,
is
there's
pray to save face. Yeah.
of course, yeah. And I know that no one probably could have pushed me. I know that people could have loved me into that, but I don't know how that would have worked out because that wasn't an option for me. So I try to be there for those that I feel are still caught in that. Like I said, I do have a few family members that are still actively and openly participating and still go every week. And the age that they are and as long that they've been in, I think that it would do more harm, like I said, to hear me really tell my story.
Right.
And there's no validation needed there. I don't need them to hear me say that they're in a cult. I don't need to hear them say that any of it was wrong or that they still believe it doesn't matter. I love them. They love me. And honestly, there's some of those people that the doctrine makes them good people. And at the end of the day, that's okay with me. You know what I mean? They aren't out harming people and they are, one of the people that aren't necessarily extremists. And um, if that is the reason, even though like you are both atheists, you said,
Mm-hmm.
and I think as someone who doesn't, I can't necessarily say I'm atheist, but someone who doesn't believe in that God, um, if one of my children struggled with drugs or anything that really got a hold on them and they found themselves in a situation where clinging to the Bible was the only string that kept them sober, I would buy every version of the Bible I could find. I would stock every space of theirs because if that's what calls you and that's what makes you a good person, awesome. I don't believe that Armstrong was a good person. And unfortunately, he got some really great people to follow his bullshit. But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
he was awful.
It almost seems like the people who really did want to see good in the world and cared about the world were the ones that were somehow most vulnerable to what he had to offer.
Right.
It's like the doomsday was the control, but in some ways, so was the promise of the world tomorrow. I became an activist, and I found that like, oh, that was probably figuring into it, the idea that there would be this better world. And so I could imagine it. And so then when I thought God's not going to do it, I thought, well, okay, I guess we
Yeah,
have
it's up to
to.
us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's up to us.
When you see all these terrible things happening in the world, that's a good thing because, oh, God's going to come and then we're going to go to this
Yes.
amazing place. Then you don't
Yes.
do anything to make the world better. And fuck it.
Exactly.
I love the world. I love this world. I love
Yeah.
exploring it and I love the people. Even with
Yeah.
all its problems, I love it and I try to make it better.
Yeah. Anytime I'm talking to someone who doesn't know anything about the cult or its history, I tell them, I'm like, I can kind of put the entire dichotomy in a nutshell by if you read the statement, don't believe me, believe your Bible, which for the listeners, that was something Armstrong was known for saying. And
Yes.
he was a what are they called? He was a very assertive, aggressive, like, he used that throat voice and it was like, don't believe me, believe your Bible. Like he was
The
yelling
head
at
bob
you, Yeah, and the finger.
pounding on the podium.
Don't
So I think that
forget the head,
Yes.
oh
right?
yes, yes, and the brows, the furrow. Jesus.
I will bring you the truth.
Oh,
Yeah.
She's getting good at that.
Sorry.
Careful. You manifested him too much. We do not need him to come back.
No.
Stay where he lays.
Our poor human efforts are not going to bring world peace, but I have been called by the eternal God to show the heads of nations the way to world peace and how it will come and how the eternal God will finally bring us world peace by sending Jesus Christ in power and great glory to rule all nations and to bring us world peace living by God's way instead of the way of human nature as people have been living on this world.
But I think the entire dichotomy could be summed up in, if you know that going into your research, that was one of his largest platforms was, just read your Bible. Everything I say is right there. It's backed up. Don't believe me, believe your Bible. Meanwhile, you're reading your Bible, don't look at what I'm doing. And I think that is honestly just such a great nutshell of the dichotomy of the entire system was, don't look at what I'm doing. Keep your nose in the Bible, listen to what I say, do as you're told, not as you see. The entire thing was an oxymoron once you really start picking it apart.
Like a bad parent.
Yes, I will be your leader until the end of times. Shit, I'm about to die. I have to pick my predecessor. How did none of us pick up on that? Like I say us, I was a child, but how did none of the adults not go, wait a minute, why is he choosing a predecessor? He told us he would not die until the end of times. He would lead us into the promised land. I mean, it just really, for people who don't understand, I'm like, if you go into your research knowing that he said that and really, truly just read any of the levels of control that he actually reached while philandering and allegedly touching his sister. And, I read one of those, I think it was on that actual blog where it was talking about the accusations where it was saying,
or daughter.
Was it? Oh, it was his daughter.
I think it was daughter.
I think it was. That's right. Excuse me. He
No, you're fine.
was taking her out, told her to dress up that night or something. And she's like, aren't you worried that they'll see you? And he's like, sundown, duh. Like, no, they're all at home doing what I told them to do. Of course I can take you out and grope on you in public. And
Ew.
I just was like, holy shit. Like, yeah. So when you really identify the things that we held as holy, that they were literal abuse tactics, it's kind of like, whoa, how many times in one lifetime can the rug just be ripped out from underneath you and everything you thought was a material experience was actually just smoke and mirrors? Have you guys ever been to a campus?
Oh yeah.
We lived in California too, but up in San Jose. So we had family down in Los Angeles area. So we went to the Ambassador Auditorium a few times in our childhood. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, in your child. Oh, so while you were in.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy. So, we always saw the videos. There would be like these cool drone shots of the spiraling bird statue out front with the fountain that they used to dance around. It was kind of this opening to all of the feast or I think it was the Feast of the Tabernacle videos.
Youth ambassadors.
That's what it was, because they did all of the choir performances on the lawn there.
It's not far away. Hold up your hands and say, there's gonna be a great day. On a wonderful day. Yes, a wonderful day. On a wonderful, 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 wonderful day. Like today.
But I went and was just, it was weird because I think as a child, it was something we'd always dreamt of. So I don't know what it would have been like to go while I was still there. It probably would have been like the promised land. I would have probably felt like I had gotten a little closer to God.
Oh yeah. Everything was covered in gold. I mean,
that was the sickening part. I think as a child, it was like, look what God has given us. Look what we're so blessed. We're so lucky. When I saw those videos and then I heard that they were tearing down part of it. And I was like, that's it. I'm off work today. I'm going to pack a lunch and drive up there. I was living in San Diego County and I got there and I'm probably about to admit to a crime here on your podcast, but I got there and it was all fenced off. They were doing demolition. So I found kind of a hole in a fence and I snuck through and was like, and I got to the other side where it was kind of like the opening, the clearing just past the fountain. I stood at the fountain and sobbed. that was a cathartic experience because I was like, I finally reached it. And, it was just like,
Go fuck yourself.
wow. Yeah. And then I went to the auditorium and the seal is still on the door, which was a little paralyzing. I had not seen the seal since I left. And the carpet from the videos was still the same inside the auditorium. I mean, it was like I had like these really crazy flashbacks and I started remembering things that I didn't remember before. And then I call it my Forrest Gump Jenny moment. When I got to the top of the stairs and I saw how he was living, there was antique furniture stacked up higher than the windows in this mansion on the back of the property. And I just felt like so many people that I know and love paid for that. And so many people worked to the bone and did without. I know I, as a child, even though my parents owned a business and I would consider well off until the bankruptcy, I still didn't have things that weren't considered necessities because everything outside of necessities went to the church.
Yeah.
And that included things like yearbooks or field trips or, just being a kid. And when I saw the wealth there and the gold lined ceilings and the gold door handles with the child and the lamb and the lion, and I was like physically and psychologically ill in that moment. I was just like, this is exactly what was depicted in that scene where Jenny's standing there and just sobs and starts throwing the rocks at her childhood home. It was just like, I want to burn it to the fucking ground. All of this deserves to be ashes. And it should be a memorial park to the dreams that we could have had. You know what I mean? If we hadn't given billions to this predator. And then I noticed that the mansion he was staying in was about between 50 to 75 yards from the boys' dorm. I've heard so many stories of boys that were staying there at Ambassador College and were given special calls to go have a private meeting with Mr. Armstrong. And it was
What? This is new.
I got a little wind of this information too, Pats, and there were rumors about Stanley Rader as well, who was like it was his money guy. He made money disappear. But I didn't hear much about Armstrong on the subject, so I'm not surprised that something like that came up. I think there's so much shit behind the scenes that I don't even know if we could ever.
Yeah, I think we're still at the tip of the iceberg. That's a lot.
Well, we're not going anywhere. This podcast is here to stay, and we have so many more people to talk to. And it's so great to get your perspective, Jay. This is amazing.
Thank you.
Hearing your thoughts going into this place, because you had never been there before, correct? The auditorium?
No, and the only thoughts I had ever had of it were dreams of how amazing it would be to walk the grounds. I thought it would be a holy experience. My grandmother died having never seen it, and it was one of her greatest dreams. And that was another thing that was hard for me, because in a moment I kind of spoke to her and was like, here I am. You're welcome. You know what I mean? I know you never got to see it, but I did. And then after that, I was like, okay, cover your eyes. Because if you're listening, you're about to get pissed off. And it was just the level of wealth and just sheer exuberance was, and we used to be so proud of that, guys.
I know.
Like, we used to be like, look what we have. We didn't have a damn thing.
I pissed in one of those seats, by the way.
In the auditorium?
Yes.
Ooh, congratulations.
And they went on and fucking on forever. And I was a child needing to go to the bathroom. So I don't know if I actually asked and was told no, probably. Or I felt that they wouldn't take me anyway because my voice was never heard. And so I wasn't brought. I had to piss in the seat because I was a little girl needing to go so bad. And I remember exactly where it was. So yeah, I pissed on that place.
Well, piss on them.
Literally.
There is an episode, a mini series about different cults and restrictive controlling groups. But there was an episode done that featured a guy who grew up in the Worldwide Church of God who says, and this is something I have never heard prior and haven't heard since.
I think I know where you're going.
Woman was sent to a pray-away camp where he was assaulted and sodomized, and I mean some horrific things.
Yeah. You are referring to James Swift, who is also a drag queen known as Ms. Fifi Frost, who has a book known as Busted Rhinestone, and I have connected with him. We are dying to hear the rest of his story because it's a very tragic one. So I'm not surprised that you heard his name, since he's probably one of the most well-known survivors of the WCG.
Yeah, I think it was one of the first really media that I found that was covering it when I was just really searching for it. And I was just like, I was honestly shocked because I was curious to know if maybe it was more of a local thing, like you're saying, if it really had a lot to do with Worldwide Church of God on a broader spectrum, or if it was just maybe his local
Yeah.
community. Because I've never heard of, I know that absolutely being gay would have never been tolerated, but I don't ever remember hearing of there being kids being sent somewhere or there being a pray away camp or, did you ever hear of
Mhm.
that? You
I've heard
did.
of others as well. Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Huh.
our friend Joel of Mr. Difficult, who was actually the first person we interviewed,
Right.
talked about, well, his parents were deeply rooted in Worldwide Church of God. And they said, well, maybe it would be best, since you're not becoming straight, that you go to one of those gay conversion camps. So it was suggested to him. And I have heard other stories of, gay conversion therapy being like an early aspect of the Worldwide Church of God. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if more people reach out to us and tell their story about
Not
that.
at all.
I
Yeah,
think
not at
that's
all.
something that would have remained very hidden, but I think it's
Definitely.
there. I think
And
it's
Mhm.
I
there.
don't even necessarily think that the members would have known. You know what I mean? I think it was
I
probably
Right.
one of those
agree.
things that you went to your minister and was like, I have this problem. I need your help. And they were like, well, we have this place. I doubt that it was something openly talked to. I don't think that we would not have, I've never heard of it, you know?
Mhm.
Prior
Right.
to his experience, I've never heard of them even existing, much less anyone's experience at one. So I'm just, obviously, there's still so much we don't know. God.
But we're going to hopefully uncover those things. So,
Well, and I'm
yeah.
realizing really how different people's experiences were regionally, right?
Yeah.
And so we're touching on that a little bit where I think, yeah, depending on your own parents, right? Like if we assume that maybe parents who got involved in this were a little bit, off the beaten path or on the
Mhm.
extreme side in other ways, they obviously brought that to their parenting of us. But with James Swift, he talked a lot about demons. And demons figured in pretty heavily to our young childhood, but he talked about it way more than I recall. But if you're saying he was from Louisiana, I mean, in
Mhm.
some ways
That,
that
yeah,
kind of fits, right?
definitely.
So what
Yep.
was your experience with that kind of stuff? Or you can take this a different direction if you want. But
Demons were the reason anything bad happened. Um,
Mhm.
I think if I became inquisitive about why we did something or even wanted a deeper understanding of something, I think it was kind of the adults' go to tell me that I was teetering in a dangerous place and that those were demons I was letting in to even really ask those questions. So then I would get smart and say something like, well, why did God give me free will then? And
Mhm.
that was just, I think it was just kind of a scapegoat for things that were either uncomfortable or they really fully didn't understand. I think that's a kind of an underlying tone in a lot of the members was that it was a blind following and there wasn't a lot of full understandings or definitions of things that we did. And when, as an inquisitive kid, I don't have that
Mhm.
answer, and that's slightly embarrassing. And it's a demon. Just that's the devil. Yeah.
Patty and I realized, even though, like, maybe you were convinced that a God exists, Patty, but I didn't as a child. But I had this terrible, terrible fear of demons, even well into my like late 20s, early 30s. I had sort of that fear of demons was still instilled in me, that which is crazy that I didn't necessarily believe a God existed, but yet I thought demons did. And that's how deep rooted the
Isn't
fear
that
went.
crazy?
I mean, James
No
Swift, it
light
sounded
without
like he had
darkness.
it whole nother level, because he described, at least in the Netflix episode, he talked about, oh, his parents were talking about there's different demons out there. Like, you have a gay demon in you, or if you can't stop eating, you have a gluttonous demon. It's like they all had their
Exactly.
different roles to play. It's fucking crazy.
Mhm.
ooh,
Yeah.
Which I guess touching back a little bit on my own religious exploration, there was a time where I wanted to educate myself on Wiccan traditions. I had kind of strayed away from anything that was biblical because I was looking for truth, right? I wasn't looking for fairy tales. So I was looking for
yes.
stories that were, and I say truth, but I still wanted to understand all of the Greek gods. And I wanted, not because I believed that they existed and wanted to follow them, but because I wanted to understand the culture behind it and the
Yes.
traditions that people had, related around these gods and things like that. And I eventually landed on it's funny, you guys might have the same experience. Anything not Christian is pagan, right?
Yes.
That is
Yeah.
the real definition. But pagan to the church was demonic.
Yeah.
If you were participating in any kind of witchcrafty stuff or tarot, or even I remember horoscopes.
Mhm.
That's paganism. And it's so funny now because my mom's like, you got to watch that pagan stuff. And I'm like, that non-Christianity stuff? Like, that's what you're saying? It's
Even card playing could be equated with paganism, right? And that, according
Well,
to
that's
that
why a lot
definition.
of fundy churches are anti-playing cards.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I landed on, I think it's Seven Seals of Solomon, which is
Mhm.
the supposed story of how he figured out the powers of his ring and he could control the demons with this one ring.
Oh,
And
dear.
I just thought, there is fairy tale in every belief, every one. And I think they're all neat stories, just like any other book that I would read. I think that just like children's stories, there's a reason that there's a children's story for kids whose daddy's about to deploy, or whose parent is transgender, or you give a kid a book about their bodies or their emotions. And I really think that that's what those stories are for, is that it kind of creates a picture of some moral lesson.
Yeah.
And I think in order to really sell that to someone I'm raising or trying to teach, here's this really easy, colorful, interesting story form that's going to teach you how to navigate those moral codes. And at the end of the day, I think that's a great thing. Whatever kind of resonates with you as far as what makes you a good person and why they did what they did, it's so interesting to me. And I think that even in paganism, I have found so many things that I've added to my own moral book. And I think it's funny because the story of Solomon is how he made demons or how he took demons to his benefit. It's not some awful story of demons ruining his life or, possessing him in any way or anything like that. It was, he built his kingdom because he controlled them and they were his slaves essentially. And it was kind of this like aha moment that it's like, wait a minute, they're all just fairy tales. None of
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
they're all just fairy tales. And I think they all have that life lesson at the end, that after school special thing. But at the end of the day, worshiping any of them is insane.
Folklore exists for a reason. If there's something scary in the woods and you don't want your children to go out there, hey, create monsters and say, don't go out in the woods alone
Exactly.
at night because there's monsters out there. Yes, there definitely would have been reasons that people created these stories, whether it's just for entertainment or it was based on something that was happening in the world at the time. As long as people look at it as that, stories, fairy
Right.
tales, mythology, folklore, because that is what it is. You cannot, things like talking serpents. How can you look at a story like that and not say, well, that is part of mythology?
Yeah.
And I'm
Never had a
sorry.
talking snake come teach me a lesson, I can tell you that.
Sometimes I think my corn snake is trying to tell me something, but I've never heard her audibly.
Not connecting, just not picking up on what she's putting down.
But I was gonna say about stories, it makes so much sense that mythology has been the thing that carried through, and then we kind of like tried to make it real, and like how we made religion try to say it's real. Because I think humans kind of shifted, right? Like stories were how we remembered things because we're
Right.
relational species. And so to just remember a list of rules or something was never going to stick in our
No.
early civilization brains. We had to tell stories because that's how we related, how we could remember it.
Yeah, that's why we don't give children the old English version of the Bible. We give them children's stories with pictures. When the splinter happened, they had just kind of opened a youth Saturday school for us. Before we always sat with our parents, they had just, I would say within 6 months of the splinter, opened a like Saturday program for the youth. And we went in and colored like pictures of a Bible story and learned the Bible story sort of thing. But ours was much more vulgar and a little more bloody. We got the gore in our children's stories. Well, I remember the Ten Commandment movie. We had it on VHS, and it was one of the few things I was actually allowed to watch on television. And I remember that being entirely too heavy for the age I was allowed or even forced to watch that. Kids' Bible stories, they're very
Not kid friendly.
sugar-coated, and well, I feel like most of them are sugar-coated, and they're very
Of
like,
course.
you know, like Jesus broke bread and he shared it with the children. And, you know, in our versions, he did, but there was bodies on the ground and there was, you know, I just felt like we got the more raw version. They didn't sugarcoat it for us, I don't think. Or maybe
Which I
that's more
almost
my experience.
appreciate a little bit more. I'm like, yeah, this shit is in the Bible. It's not like many Christians today or evangelicalists will be like, yeah, they will absolutely sugarcoat the stories. I'm like, that's not what it says. Like, if
Well,
you
I
know
think
what,
that since we were taught the real deal, like what the Bible actually says, and then taught it was a good thing, I think the stuff we learned, we just learned to accept it. And so it didn't, like, for people who grew up in the fluffy stuff, I think they hear the real thing or read the Bible and they're like,
Yeah.
oh. And it's like a major vehicle for deconstruction. Where for us, we
Mhm.
just were like, well, yeah, it's bad because that's God and God gets to do what God wants to do. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I also think being Old Testament, it was more fire and brimstone than our peers at school who were not learning about Revelation and the
yay!
shit. Yeah,
The shit.
the shit. It was some heavy shit. And they wonder why we're dark adults or why we all have dark humor. You fucking kidding me? Really?
I know we can handle shit. That's what I've noticed.
For real.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been told that so many times that I've had so many people say this doesn't faze you, and I'm like, no, not. This is a regular Tuesday. Like,
Right. Like I didn't even think I was gonna grow up. This is all fine. Like I'm
the
still
fact
here.
that I made it to adulthood and got married and had children. And, you know, the crazy part is I remember as a child, while we were still there, my mom saying, I remember feeling that way. I remember being so afraid that I wouldn't. And I, nor she, recognized that she grew up, she had a child and was now having that conversation with her child, and that was never a red flag.
Mm.
And my grandma would say the same thing. I remember feeling that way because she was a young woman when she found Mr. Armstrong in the radio show.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Man, he had some fucking pull. He was an early pioneer of radio. So, like, he was a televangelist before televangelist was a thing.
Yes.
He knew what to do and he did it well.
Oh, you were talking earlier about his like failed predictions and stuff.
Yeah.
Nancy found some reference in like 1936 where he was like, yep, the 7 years of tribulation has started. Like, really?
He did that twice,
Really?
I think.
Oh, he did that more than twice, I think.
I know at least there was one in my lifetime, so I would say early mid 90s. And I remember my parents shifting into like, okay, we could probably sell some of our stuff and consolidating, and, you know, and this is another thing. I think this is, it's all a part of the division, but they made us pretentious, I think.
Yes.
I was
Ooh,
getting
go
on a
into
plane.
that.
You guys got to stay here and burn. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep.
I'm going to build his gold kingdom while you suffer through the tribulations. Chosen, you know?
The sense of being elevated. Absolutely.
Yes. And poor thing, bless your heart. You know, you don't really understand the Bible.
Yeah.
And it was just
Well,
like
you.
we very much looked down our noses at people, whether it was
Oh, yeah.
openly like spoken about. I don't think it was ever vocalized to do that. It was just in the tone. It was just kind of enforced. And I think that's the same thing with the race division, was that I was never, ever, ever taught that Black people were less than me or different than me in that way. It was that tribe theory, you know what I mean? And it wasn't a less than or a better than or a good or bad. It was just separate. It was just different. It was just, we are us, they are them. And I just can't, I don't know. I don't know how he did it. My fiance jokes, he's like, man, if I had a time machine, I'd go back and do it. He's like, you know how easy it is? Be sitting around a caveman campfire and watch a lightning go off and be like, did you see that? I know who did that. And unless you want it to happen again, this is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Boom.
Oh my
Religion
gosh.
created.
Ew.
You know? Yeah.
Ew.
Yeah. He undid himself so many times if you just listen closely. And unpicking it has been a whole other journey. It's like really going, where did that come from? And realizing how he really did cherry pick from so many other cultures. And really, that was what he made, was a soup pot. That was the only thing he did of his own, was pour everything in a pot and call it his ideas, because it was
Oh yeah.
Right.
it's insane. If you really start picking them apart, you can see the trail of where he was on his journey.
Well, you have done your research, Jay. I love it. Do you know much about some of the offshoots, like the worst out there, like Philadelphia Church of
Philadelphia.
God, Restored Church of God, and David C. Pack? Because they're just regurgitating everything Armstrongism as well. Now, there's a lot of offshoots out there, but if you want to like take an exact snapshot of the Armstrong Church worldwide, look at Philadelphia Church of God.
Definitely.
Holy shit. He even created his own university, and the church looks exactly like Ambassador College. It's ridiculous. And
Yeah.
all
So
the book
weird.
titles the same, like he just regurgitated.
It's embarrassing. It's
It is
embarrassing.
It is. It really is. I think I mentioned it earlier. My fiance is from East Texas, where it was the Tyler
Texas.
headquarters. Yeah. So that was
Gardner
that
Ted
was I was gonna say, yeah, that was Gardner Ted. So the church is in a tiny, tiny little area. So when the piney woods would open up to us for our great Feast of the Tabernacles, we would flood his town, and the locals was like a thing that they talked about, that these weirdos from a cult came into town and slept in the woods for a week and went to church for 7 days. So when we met, yeah, when we met, we were working on a job in LA. That's how we met. And so obviously it's something that doesn't come up often, you know. And when it did, we met in Los Angeles, me having growing up in the Midwest. He grew up in Texas. We met in Los Angeles. I mentioned my religious upbringing. It was, I think, really light in passing. And he was like, wait, that one? Like the Worldwide Church of God?
Really?
What? Yes. So I'm like,
Oh no,
I'm never gonna get away from this, you know? So he tells his mom, after we get serious, he tells his mom about me, and he's like, yeah, but guess what? She grew up over at Church of God. And she's like, oh, bless her heart. Because I'm like, they are local and made fun of us our entire lives. But yeah, he was like, my mom feels so bad for you. I was just like, thanks. I appreciate that. I wish you just didn't even know, because it's so much easier to be like, oh, it's probably some church you never heard of. We're at Church of God. Just slip that under the rug, you know?
Yeah.
But he
for a
was like,
while, we all thought that it wasn't a big deal, right?
I
Just
did.
Worldwide Church of God, like nobody even knows what the fuck that is. So why are we even talking about it?
Yeah,
And yet people did know, and the
they
information
really
that's
did.
coming out in droves were very similar to, I want to say, ex-Mormons have gone through, you
Yes.
know, similar experiences.
Well, I met a girl. I was living in California. My kid's dad was in the military, and one of my neighbors on base, through a mutual friend, the mutual friend realized that the neighbor was still practicing the things that I had talked about in my childhood.
Oh.
And she's like, oh, you guys should talk about it. And I'm like, no, let's not. Like, don't even tell her. So we had a neighborhood fire one night. We're all sitting around, and she's like, hey, you know, so-and-so mentioned that you grew up Worldwide Church of God. And I just instantly was like, shit. Oh God. And I'm expecting to have the survivor talk. No, she was actively Philadelphia and thought that there was going to be some camaraderie. And I was like, oh no, no, you're not going to like this conversation. Not even a little bit. Yeah. And that was the first time I learned that there was such a carbon copy out there. I thought that they were all kind of variants of it, but the things that she was saying was like giving me total flashbacks. I was like, oh wait, this is identical. This is exactly what we did.
Well, and isn't it weird that it was like the dichotomy, to use that word again, of I'm chosen and yet I'm not good enough to.
I'm worthless.
Yes, I can't be seen. I can't be heard. I don't have good ideas. I can't use my brain. I'm inherently sinful, but I'm elect. What the hell is that? I mean, that's like one of those things that splits our brains.
Yeah, the cognitive dissonance was so real. And it's, I think, embarrassing to think about at times, because it's just like, God, how stupid were we, you know? But if you don't know, you don't know. If you're
Vulnerable.
you can't
The
understand.
people were vulnerable to the message. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I have found, because I advocate for survivors of domestic violence, and I've come across a lot of relationships in that advocacy, and I have found that it is so similar to that.
Yeah.
The tiny isolation, the small, tiny actions of taking over your thoughts and taking over your tiny little powers until you have none. Overall, it was a huge amount of power that was stolen, and it was so tiny in the moment that you didn't see it go missing. I have an analogy that I use that with a lot of my clients that feel it resonates with them deeply. And I always say it's like a true abuser doesn't steal your whole sandcastle at once. They take it one grain at a time.
Oh,
And then you look up and it's just gone.
Wow.
And I think that's something that the church really did. Whether it was taking or implanting something, it was so calculated and so minute that you didn't realize it until the whole thing was built or the whole thing was gone.
Yeah.
It was just so tiny that it wasn't significant until it was all of it.
Yeah.
right. And they got us to participate in it. That like sit down and read your Bible, right? Because they've told you already what those words do mean, the truth of them. So then you read them over and over, and it's just going to reinforce it. So you like kind of self-indoctrinate.
Yeah. It was just kind of like that first class was given, and the rest we did to ourselves, which is, I think, it's like a centripetal thing because it makes it harder to admit and therefore harder to leave.
Yes.
I've been duped. I'm not smart. I was blind. I think that is a lot of why some people don't even talk about it, because it's like, I would rather just not think about it. Yeah, because now, obviously, we all know from the outside how obvious and how ridiculous it is. And I sometimes laugh out loud, like, oh my God, I can't believe that's real life, that's really, we did that.
It's healing to laugh about it.
It is. It really is, because, I mean, what are you going to do except laugh and just be like, that happened, and move on with your life.
Yeah, we can laugh at Gerald Flurry.
Yes.
People like David C-Pack all day long.
Exactly.
Fuck they are David still C-Pack. Causing a lot of harm. Too.
I had to say it.
Yes.
Sorry, repeat it. What did you say?
Oh, I said, fuck David C-Pack. That's like your guys' tagline at this point. We should just say it once in every episode.
There's one episode
I'm waiting for that letter.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I heard that, and I said it out loud when I was listening to that episode. I was like, yeah, fuck David C-Pack. So I was like, I gotta say it at least one time while I'm on there, dude.
All right, me too.
Join us. Don't want to be left out. If I was to be in front of a crowd and said, if you take nothing else from this, it would probably be the education on how there is a correlation between cult behavior and domestic abuse. I think that there's not enough weight given, just I think in simply not even cult behavior, but the cultures, I know predominantly in the South, that it's that old Bible Belt, speak when you're spoken to as a woman, and be subservient to your man. I think that indoctrination is kind of across the board. And especially as a young woman growing up believing that I had no value and that I had no say and that I didn't have a brain or a thought or a power of my own. I think that's a really dangerous place to go. And I think that's a really dangerous place to have any experience in whatsoever. And I think that speaking to any human being, I think that that's what I would like to share the most, is that when you truly know yourself, your own needs, and you have a strong moral code, and that's only, in my experience, found by listening to everyone's code. Why do you believe that? Where do you get that belief? Is there a material experience attached to that led you to believe that way? Meeting people where they are has formed kind of and I call it cherry picked because I'm going to put a positive spin on that word. I've cherry picked things that resonated with me really well because I know myself now. And I think that whether you're wanting a better job or to be successful in a career or to make sure that you're not entering any type of toxic relationships, be it romantic or family, knowing yourself, knowing your needs, and having a strong, firm foundation on this is what I need, this is what I have to offer, and I'm open about that. This is what I lack, and this is where my weaknesses are, and this is what these are the hills I will die on. I think that has helped improve my life as a survivor of domestic violence, as a survivor of a cult and control in general. I think so. If I had one message to share, it would just be to sit with yourself and know yourself. I call it dating yourself, because when you're dating someone, you ask all those really awkward questions and tell me
Yes.
about your childhood, and you want to get to the bottom of that, but we don't do it with ourselves, and you should, because I think
Yeah.
so many of the people I know and love that suffered from Mr. Armstrong's teachings were just looking for peace
Yeah.
and something to hold on to when shit went wrong. And I think that that's a really unfortunate thing that happened. I think that he knew that. I think that he took advantage of that. But I think knowing that information can really spread out in a lot of categories of the human experience, not just religion. I think that just really knowing yourself and being like, I know as women, people cross our boundaries all the time. They try our boundaries, be it
Yep.
a person in the street, at the register, someone who's personal in our lives. And I think that there's that unspoken permission that's given when we allow it to happen that first time without the reaction. And the only reason that happens is because we didn't know ourselves. If I had already thought about this situation and what I wanted to happen in that situation, I would have had an immediate reaction and been like, this is my boundary. The reason I didn't have a boundary and the reason that that boundary was kind of blurred moving forward was because I didn't set with myself prior to this. And I don't think we can prepare for any situation, but I just think that that is so important. And I've learned that it ties into, just like I said, every level of the human experience for both men and women, is just understanding and having a hard line on that, and knowing that no matter where you've been, you're going somewhere else. I know specifically a lot of my family members have struggled with, okay, so if Armstrongism was bad and he was bad, was my loved one who I thought was an earth on saint, who, or a saint on earth, who's no longer here with us, does that make them not a good person anymore?
Mhm.
And there's just been so much, go with it. And I think there's all of that. To me, the single common denominator is the lack of just sitting with yourself. There's so much
Right.
peace and forgiveness and understanding and calm in that. And I think that we would all make better decisions, and we would not get caught in those toxic, controlling situations if we knew before we went in that, like, no, this is not okay with me.
Yeah.
That was beautiful, Jay.
Oh, thank you.
I don't
Indeed.
think people know where to start. We have everyone in our society telling us how we are supposed to be, how we are supposed to think. For years, I didn't know the first thing about myself. It took me a really long time. I'm like, how do I get to know myself? I don't know what I want. I was taught not to want.
Yes.
Just want the
Exactly.
things of this
You're
world.
exactly. You're a vessel of God, not of anything else. And
Right. Just a fucking slave for the Christian God. That's it.
Mhm. And
We
they're
only come into the world with ourselves.
exactly. And
Uh-huh.
and going back to the demons, I was taught that even that was, having a thought anything other than just serving was, I was
Right.
letting it in. I think that's why, among many reasons, I ended up in an abusive relationship, because it was like,
Mm.
well, if you're thinking for yourself, you're being dramatic. You know what I mean? I talked myself, I gaslit myself, because
Oh,
that was kind of the tone of the church, I think.
you draw such a important parallel between domestic abuse and the way the cult operated.
Mhm.
To the point that Nancy and I went to a conference recently, and there was a group of therapists working on a wheel that took the domestic abuse wheel of power and control and adapted it and showed exactly how it paralleled to what cult control is like. I mean, it really is a single person to a single person versus, a person or organization to a broad range of people, but the dynamics are the same.
Yeah, if you were to look at the list of things that you're supposed to be able to check off the boxes to identify what a true cult is, and you frame that in a relationship, they're identical. You could check off every box. I was isolated. I was, told things that made me believe less about myself. My own thoughts were replaced with theirs. If I had that
Mhm.
list in front of me, we could go over each one of them. You can check them just like they're identical. It's
Yeah.
insane.
And we were blown away, like, how do these leaders, know the tactics to use to manipulate and control people. It's like they all took the same fucking course and they know exactly how to get what they want out of people. How do they know this?
For the same reason that all narcissists are the same. I think it starts in childhood. If you know anything about true narcissism, it's more often than not bred in overloved children and not necessarily neglected children.
Interesting.
Children who are never held responsible for their behavior, children who are always made excuses for. So that starts early. And when your parents are teaching you how to manipulate that because they're manipulating it, you know, we all know that when we cry, food comes, comfort comes. You know, we're taught that so early within the first few hours of life that I think those manipulation lessons are being taught also. And like I said, there's only one way to control someone, and they figure it out. It's easier than I think people like us could imagine, because we could never imagine doing that, right?
Yeah.
That's a really good point. It's true. You make them afraid and you've got them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Armstrong used to call his people dumb sheep. Apparently he's done that on like,
which was true, but not in the way that he spoke it. You know what I mean?
he said that he had no respect for people that he could so easily manipulate.
Same. I see where you're coming from, but how dare you?
Yeah. How
As the
fucking
one
dare
who manipulated us, how fucking dare you?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's something I really own. Shame is another thing that I teach with anybody that I'm working with, that shame is the reason you don't leave. Shame is the reason you don't call your mom and dad and tell them that you need a place to stay. Shame is the reason you don't move back home. You know, shame of divorce is the reason you don't leave. All of that is something that we should normalize, and owning our shit, because we're all human. I think that's hard to accept, being taught what we taught, but just having a human experience and knowing that what you did was, it's okay. It wasn't okay, but it is okay. And just moving on and loving and learning. And I don't know.
It's true. It really is like that ability to let go of the, like, oh no, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And being like, oh yeah, I fucked that up. Now what?
Yeah.
Is like, whew. It's just, it lifts that weight off.
You
And
didn't
to add on top of that, yeah, people that taught their children the exact same way, and that added layer of shame, like, oh, I think I fucked up my children, but actually realizing it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I think if you can just look yourself in the mirror and go, it's not like I knew the truth and signed anyway. You know, we were duped. We didn't make a stupid decision. We thought we made really good decisions. It was sold wrong. That's not our fault. And I think when you can just really, that wasn't my fault. You know, I'll be smarter next time. That was my percentage of the problem. I'm smarter now. You know, I know what I know moving forward. I'm better educated and it can't happen again. But yeah, I was duped. He was a great duper. At the end of the day, millions, right?
Yes.
So we are one of millions of people who bought his bullshit. Does that really mean anything other than he was good at what he did? That's all that says.
Yeah.
Well, it also says that we were, you know, below the age of reason when this was told to us as truth.
For us specifically, yes, absolutely. But I don't think that anybody joined trying to become what he was doing behind closed doors.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
You know, I don't think that anybody had those intentions or that it was going on. I think that everybody I knew anyway, I can say that everybody I encountered were just good people trying to do the best they could.
Yeah. Totally agree with you. And in some ways, that's how I feel about humans in general. Everybody's working with what they've got. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I suppose there are.
Of course, there's days.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, it sucks here. Humans are not the greatest, but no,
it's true.
Overall, I don't think that that's the human. I think that's the human experience that we're seeing in that moment. And that's what I mean by meeting people where they are. If you can't understand someone else's material experience and how their beliefs are their own, how can you change them? You know, if I don't understand why you're a horrible racist, bigot, misogynist, and I don't understand where that came from and who taught you those things, how can I unteach you those things? I can't.
True. Yeah.
I have to meet you where you are, grab your hand, and take you with me. I can't stand where I am going, you should be over here.
Yeah.
I think that's humanity. That's humanism. That is,
Oh.
like I said earlier, that is my religion.
Humanism. Yes, secular
That's
humanism.
Really.
tangible.
Yes, it
It's
is. It
tangible.
is. Yes.
I can feel it. I can see it. I experience it. I can go out and seek it and receive it. I don't know any other Christian that can say that. I know that there's a certain feeling. I've heard people be like, "Oh, I needed that sermon." And I think personally for them, that's amazing. But I also get the same feeling when I spent 20 minutes alone on the beach listening to the
Mhm.
waves. It is the
Exactly.
same peace. My parents owned a group home with adults who were developmentally challenged. So
Mhm.
when I went to school, everyone's like, "Oh, that's the girl that lives in the group home and goes to that church."
Mm.
They thought that I was a resident of the home and not someone because we were like live-in caretakers for the home.
Mhm.
So in elementary school, people thought that I was living in a group home and going to this church, and it was like um, I was picked on for it, and people just kind of assumed that I was just this really weirdo. And I went to church on
Mhm.
Saturdays, and I didn't participate in the Christmas programs, and I felt like it like put a target on my back almost.
Mm.
Did you
Mhm.
guys feel that way?
Same. Yeah.
Did you get bullied for it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I did for
I
sure.
I do not remember getting bullied for it. And
I
I
did.
I never felt like the target came from the school or anything. I felt like I was imposing it. More like I was the one knowing that I was there saying, "I'm not gonna do these things that you guys do."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that I never felt anything from the other kids. But we also
Oh,
lived
that's
in
good.
California where it was really diverse and, there was kids of all races and Jewish kids and all the things. And so I
Right.
got more questions of like, well, are you Seventh-day Adventist or are you Jewish?
Jehovah. That was
Yes.
what I always got. Are you Jehovah?
Yeah.
Because we didn't celebrate the
Oh,
holidays and observe the seventh day. That was always like, wait, are you Jehovah? You don't have Christmas? You don't have Easter?
yeah.
I didn't even know what that was.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And the way that they said it, I almost thought they were calling me a bad word for a little while until I really understood because they were like, "Are you Jehovah?" Like you're not, are you? And I was like, I don't think so. I guess I got to ask my mom. I'm not
It was
sure.
Yeah.
so hard to
Right?
explain to
It
people
was,
too.
and I feel like I just got tired of explaining it.
Yes.
'Cause I didn't even fully understand it. So then I
Right.
would give this half-ass answer that would lead to more questions that I couldn't answer. So it was just
Oh,
like, I don't know. It's just yeah, except for the day that we left for the feast. That was a magical day because they were there for the next week and I was like, "See you later, bitches. I'm out." And I got to leave with all of my work for the week, and they
go
had to go to
party for a
school.
week.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
That that exact thing has come up more than once. A
Yep.
couple
Yeah,
other
because we
Jewish
had
topics.
nothing over anybody ever. Like, it was the one thing we had was that you guys have to go to school this weekend, we don't. Every other thing in our lives is unequal, but this time I got you. And, I didn't learn until recently that part of the feast is being luxurious and being lavish and spending that money.
I didn't
I didn't
understand that either. You're right.
blew
Yeah.
my mind. I was like, "No wonder I felt like, huh, this is the life." It was like we ate at the nicer restaurants and we went mini golfing and we oftentimes met up with a shit ton of other people. Do you remember
Mhm.
that? Like taking over an entire Golden Corral
Oh,
after
Yes.
yes.
church? Pretty sure they hated all of us, but
Yeah.
we would
We're
roll
all
in like 100 deep. Like, "We'll take the whole restaurant, please," at the
Jay,
same time.
it's funny because I came across in all my research an article from way back when, maybe it was the 70s, but it was from Lake Tahoe where the feast used to be in that area. And I just remember reading about the locals hating all the Worldwide Church of God members because they
Yeah.
were so fucking cheap. Like they never tipped and they just took over all the restaurants in town. And
We didn't
God,
tip? We were there for the Feast of the Tabernacles and we were known for not tipping. That is disgusting.
I mean,
So
from this
wrong.
article, yes, people just hated the Worldwide Church of God members coming into town for the feast. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was what my fiance says about, the Piney Woods location. They had that huge camp. And I know my grandmother and her sister went one year and talked about how gorgeous it was. And we never made it down there, thank God, because I told him we might have crossed paths earlier than we intended. That would have been weird. But I know that the entire town has like a taste in their mouth about it.
Yeah.
They're like,
I think
here they come.
we're realizing there's all these people coming out still who need to hear these things. And
Mhm.
they're going to be people who are, still having various levels of belief. And so the pure atheistic YouTube channels probably aren't going to be a place where they want to hang out. But
Right.
maybe that middle ground of like, hey, let's prioritize rationality and good decision making
Yeah.
along the way with the healing,
Yeah. Rational thought.
Hey, imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah. Rationality is, I think, could have done a lot of undoing if we had just been rational. Like,
Yeah.
let's really think about what he just said. Break that
Right.
apart, you know. But yeah, I think that's why I said what I said, as far as no matter what relationship it is, whether it's your religion, a romantic relationship, your own family, toxic is toxic.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's ever too late, no matter what you've invested or no matter what you've lost or given, it is never too late to go, this isn't for me. And
Yeah.
I think that is what you were saying about the atheist channels not really being the first place they want to go. And that's because that's a really big leap.
Right.
Yeah.
And for those who were taught that that's a demonic thought, like you're just going straight into the deep end, you know?
Yeah.
And I think starting with love and kindness and humanity and rational thought, and then kind of easing your way into maybe survivor stories. And then I think it kind of ends, for me anyway, it ended with the real shit, the reading through the court cases, the accusations, the tax paperwork, walking the campus. That was those real things that are like, okay, this is what I've been hearing about. This is the shit I've been denying. Here it is. Like, take the glasses off. It's really there. But I don't think that I could have done that without those first steps of just kind of putting a pause button on and
Yes.
listening to other people and learning a little bit about myself and kind of picking apart, well, does that really sound real or rational? Or, they were such tiny steps.
Yeah.
So I think that your guys' platform is going to be awesome for that. And not just people who are leaving cults, but people who are leaving anything that doesn't serve them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really where we should be headed. No matter what we're leaving behind, it should be, I'm headed towards something that serves me, period.
Yes.
I hope that you guys get a lot of newcomers, both survivors and people who've never heard of it. Because like I said, I think that there's that level of understanding that needs to be taught too.
Mhm.
It's hard to say I was in a cult when someone's like, you're in a fucking cult? Don't
Right.
react that way.
Thank you, Jay, for saying that. And we really are saving space for specifically people who are survivors of the Worldwide Church of God. But we have broadened the topic to anyone who's in some sort of like religious setting of high control or evangelicalism, or if they just want to talk about their deconstruction journey. We realize people are on different not tiers, but like in different places. And we were actually quite shocked to see how many Worldwide Church of God members were still Christian in some form. Like, we would have thought, they wouldn't want anything to do with it, but no, because it was like Christianity was at least a step in the right direction, which is how Patty and I found ourselves in evangelicalism. So we also have that, a part of our lives to discuss. And so, but Worldwide Church of God members will definitely always get priority. But we have broadened the topic for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's great. You can't prove the commonalities if you're not interviewing people from all walks of it. You know what I mean? There's no way to prove that control is control if we're not proving control in all categories.
Right.
That's a great point. Yeah.
You can't prove the correlation between domestic violence and cult behavior if you don't also talk to someone who was never in a cult but had the exact same somehow experience as us in a domestic violence situation. That is hard proof right there. Nobody can deny that. So I think that's a good thing. And I noticed I don't have the fear. Like, it's okay if I make a mistake. I'll get back up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's okay. I'm human. I'm not going to go to hell.
No.
Isn't that just life altering to not be put into a place of fight or flight for the smallest thought of what I might have done wrong? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think you really hit it on the head when you said that we were chosen, yet we were nothing. I hadn't really put that into words, and I think that that's something I needed to hear, and I'm probably going to explore that a little bit because it's I think that is ingrained in my entire family, honestly. I think that the women in my family need to hear that. That is a cognitive dissonance that we can't measure the outcome that implemented in our thought process and the way that we perceive everything around
Totally
us,
agree.
honestly. I mean, how could you be chosen over everyone else yet be nothing?
Yes.
That's a weird psychological place to be in. So I think that we should certainly explore that and see if that's one of those things that are manifesting in our now lives, because I know there's still some shit I got going on, that's like, oh, there it's rearing its head, Thankfully I can
Jay,
identify it, but it's there.
as horrible as it is that you got into an abusive relationship after the cult, I've got to say, I am definitely not surprised that you did, because I use this reference too. Like, well, if you're taught to just obey and not ask questions or even get physically abused, how in the fuck are you supposed to go out into the world and know what a healthy relationship looks like? An abusive relationship looks like the norm to you. And so, of course, you're going to do it as an adult.
Yeah, that was God's love.
Oh, you fuck all the way off.
Exactly. How was I supposed to think that it wasn't bad? And to that point, I think that I was built for gaslighting in that way, because
you were trained to.
I know that he taught me that no one else would want me, and that if I left, good fucking luck, and that was the same tone as the church, was that I was nothing but a sinner, and I think that translates across, was that when he told me it was my fault, it probably was. And I think that the church did that too. The reason this is happening is because you're not doing it right. And I mean, that is
some bullshit.
Absolutely identical weapons right there. They are identical. They mirror each other. And I think that lack of education on that is really, really, really dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're beautiful, you're smart, you're strong.
Yeah.
And really put that into yourself in the mirror, because sometimes nobody's going to show up but you. You have to do that for yourself. But you'll show up.
The need to be loved, the need to be accepted, the need to be approved of.
And just have a human experience. Allow yourself to have that. Like I said, not being afraid of burning in an eternal hell for having a bad thought or a dirty thought, or I remember thinking, I can't control what pops into my head, but I can go to hell for it. We have nothing to stand on. So,
and that's the important work of deconstructing away from that, is you find footing again.
So you were standing on your own all along. Just giving yourself that credit is like, holy shit, I kept my lights on. I got my ass out of bed. I hugged my loved ones then when they were hurting. That wasn't God. I have to say, God's never kept my lights on, no matter how hard I prayed. If I didn't pay it, that shit went off.
Patty and I have gotten into the habit of not saying, oh, thank God. I'm like, no, thank me.
That's a good one.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us here with Jay for this episode of the Apostate Sisters interview series. Later.
Like and subscribe. There it goes. Yay.